First of all, Elizabeth Jamison, but she goes by EJ. So we're going to talk about EJ first. She'll be presenting first today. EJ grew up in New York, spent most of her time exploring at the Adirondacks, got her bachelor's at State University of New York, SUNY, and the College of Environmental Science and Forestry before getting her master's in natural resources. She started with the Kansas Forest Service in 2022 as a forestry tech before becoming a district forester. As you might imagine, she's greatly enjoyed the forest prairie of Kansas since moving in 2021. And if you want to find her, all you need to do is to go outside, and she and her husband Jacob are probably tromping somewhere. Bryce Haverkamp, he's the district fire management officer for Northeast Kansas. He's been working in fire service since 2003 with a background in wildland and structured firefighting. In addition to his firefighting experience, he's got a strong background in education with a bachelor's in elementary education from KSU and many years of providing training to local and volunteer fire departments. As a district fire management officer, Bryce serves fire departments and communities by providing wildland fire training, direct incident report, and community preparedness. He lives in Seneca with his wife and his 4 kids. So these are our 2 guest speakers today, and I will turn it over to you.
Okay, let me just get this clipped up so I can be hands-free here.
Super high tech.
Oh, yeah. Ready to go. Okay, thank you so much for the introduction. Mic sound good? Okay, awesome. So yeah, today we're going to be talking to you about fire on your property, the good and the bad. As I was introduced, I'm EJ Jamison. I am the Northeast District Forester, and I cover the 10 counties in Northeast Kansas. And over there is Bryce. So I'm going to start off today, and I get to talk about part 1, the good. Close this out. So just a little bit more about myself. I have a pretty sweet job. I get to hike around the woods. I spend most days out there working with landowners to write forest management plans for a variety of different objectives, primarily improving the wildlife habitat, forest health, and overall timber value on different properties. That's a really impressive bur oak tree over in Donovan County. If you want to see big trees, Donovan County on those bluffs is the way to go. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about. First, I'll talk about Kansas forests. I'm a forester, got to start there. And then I'll talk a bit about forest management. And then lastly, get into fire as a forest management tool. So broad scale, we have 2 types of forests in Kansas. On the left there, we have oak hickory forests. Those are usually on the uplands, maybe a bit drier soils. And then on the right, we have our elm, ash, cottonwood forests. And those tend to be alongside rivers and floodplains in those bottomlands. But unsurprisingly, our forests have changed a lot over time. So before European colonization, forests covered about 4 to 8% of our state's land area. And they were primarily in the rich bottomlands and moist upland sites, usually in the eastern third of Kansas. And these forests were managed by Native peoples. That photo in the upper right there, that is of the state champion pecan tree at Fort Leavenworth. And Fort Leavenworth has this incredible example of one of these old growth forests if you ever get a chance to check it out. But there is a lot of really large pecans there. And pecans are pretty common in Southeast Kansas, but there's not too many up here. And so that seed would have had to jump quite a few miles to get up into Fort Leavenworth. So it's actually thought that Native peoples planted those pecans there to have a seed source closer to them. So that's a really good example of active management. And so there are 8 tribes that are native to present day Kansas, and 18 additional tribes were forcibly relocated to Kansas. And that map on the bottom right, that's approximately Kansas. And that is from the Native Land Project, which is a really cool site if you want to check it out. And it is the goal of mapping the ancestral homelands of indigenous peoples in North America. And today, our forests cover about 5% of our total land area, which is 2.5 million acres. There's an additional 1.6 million acres of agroforestry resources. So think things like windbreaks and community trees. So think of your parks and your urban trees. But since 1965, these forests have increased in density by 106%, which is really significant. So we're seeing a pretty similar percent cover of forest, that 5%, compared to those historic estimates, but where those forests have greatly changed. So again, historically forests dominated in those riparian areas alongside streams. And today, a lot of our forests have migrated upslope to areas that were historically prairie. And we're seeing a lot of changes in our forest structure and composition. That photo on the left, I actually just took yesterday. And that is a forest that has largely become dominated by eastern red cedar. And you can't really tell, but if you look across the slope in the background, there's actually a really nice oak hickory forest right behind it.
Oh, no! You didn't just do that, did you?
So why have we had this change? How did we go from these rolling prairies and these really open oak-dominated forests to what we have today? Much denser forests that are in areas that were historically prairie. And you're probably guessing it, it's fire is the main reason. So let's take a look at that. That change is caused from a change in a fire regime. And a fire regime is characterized by these 6 different traits here shown on this figure. So that character is in bold, and then the arrows represent the gradient of that character. And there are also some of the factors that impact that character listed right behind those arrows. So those 6 traits, the 2 biggest ones are fire interval. So how frequent are these fires? Is there a short interval between fires, meaning pretty frequent, or a long interval, meaning not very frequent fires? And the other main one is fire intensity. How hot is that fire? A low or high intensity. Others include seasonality. So what time of year is that fire occurring? Horizontal spread, how is it moving across the ground? Is it really patchy or is it really continuous? Vertical spread, is it climbing up into structures like trees or shrubs, or is it staying across the surface? And then the fire size, just the geographic spread of that fire. So right there in the middle, you can kind of plot a fire regime on the spectrum. And there are 2 different fire regimes shown there. Let's start with fire regime 2, which is on the bottom. And that fire regime is characterized by a pretty short fire interval, so pretty frequent fires, and pretty low intensity fires. Fire regime 1, just above that, is characterized by longer fire intervals and higher intensity fires. And so you might be hearing about pretty catastrophic wildfires in places like California, right? So we're kind of in a lot of places in the country, we're seeing a transition from fire regime type 2 here, frequent low intensity fires, to fire regime 1, which is infrequent, really intense fires that can cause a lot of damage. But that's not the only type of change we're seeing in our fire regimes across the country. So this is maybe my favorite figure ever, which is saying a lot. This comes from a 2008 paper from Nowacki and Abrams, and it is essentially showing this process called mesification on the bottom. And mesification is essentially a transition over time. So that's what's mapped out here. So pre-1900s, in a lot of areas in our country, a lot of our forests were way more open. That means we have a lot more sunlight hitting the forest floor, and those forests aren't very humid. And a lot of that leaf litter layer was really, really flammable. So we had pretty frequent low intensity fires. As we move towards the right, with fire being removed, the US adopted a fire suppression policy in the 20s. So we're stopping fires even when they establish naturally. We're seeing the canopy start to close. We're getting more shade on that forest floor, and we're getting some more of the shade tolerant species coming in, and mesophytic trees. Meso meaning wet, physic meaning loving. So we have some more shade tolerant mesophytic trees establishing, and then we keep moving and we have more of those trees establishing. We have a less flammable litter layer. We have cool and humid microclimates establishing under that shade. And so what that means is that it becomes exponentially harder to move backwards to the left as it moves further towards the right. And why does that matter? As we have this transition occurring, we're losing a lot of our species that historically dominated our forests. Those species that need the sunlight, that need those different site conditions that establish under more frequent fires. And that can have some pretty severe consequences for our native wildlife that rely on those species and our overall ecological processes. And one of the main reasons for this transition is the forced removal of indigenous people that used fire intentionally to manage for specific species and structure. Here in the Great Plains, primarily to influence the path of bison across the plains. So that's something that we're seeing unfold in a lot of areas of the country. But good news, we can help address this using forest management, which is where I come in as a forester. So just to back up and look at this forest management process, there are 3 broad phases that we focus on. Phase 1, assessment. So I get out to the site, look at the existing conditions, you know, what tree species are there? How dense are the tree species? What's in the mid-story? What's in the understory? How are the soils? Is there water on site? All of those things get funneled into phase 2, which is plan development. So that's when we talk with the landowner. What are their objectives? Are they looking primarily for wildlife habitat? Do they have a forest health concern? Pull all of that information, combine it with the existing conditions, and we'll put together a management prescription for that property, specific to those objectives and those conditions. Then we get to implement that plan. Maybe it's thinning the forest mechanically, maybe it's prescribed fire, bunch of different tools we can use there. And then phase 3, really important, we need to monitor that plan and make sure we're achieving that desired outcome. If we are, awesome. Let's keep assessing. Let's see if there's anything we need to change. If not, why are we not getting those desired outcomes? What can we do to achieve those? So that's kind of the overview of how this process works. I hope you're ready for graphs this morning. I apologize if not. So we have a bunch of different tools available to help us make these management decisions. This is a stocking chart. This is probably the most used tool for foresters. And so I apologize, it's probably a little bit hard to see there. But on the x-axis, we have trees per acre. That's pretty easy, just a count of number of trees per acre. And then on the y-axis, we have basal area per acre. So that metric is, imagine you're a bird looking down on a forest. It is the square foot per acre that is covered in tree trunk. So when you take these 2 metrics together, you can get a really good idea of the overall stand structure in a forest. And we can plot them together on this graph and classify that stand, meaning just a unit of woods essentially, as forest, you know, pretty dense, pretty closed canopy, closed woodland, still, you know, pretty forested, but a little bit more open, and then open woodland. Now we have some gaps in that canopy, more sunlight's getting into the forest floor, and then finally savanna, which is just, you know, a sprinkling of trees here and there, and a lot of grasses and forbs in the understory. So this can be a really cool tool to understand where we are currently and maybe where we want to go. And where do we want to go? There are a ton of different forest management outcomes. We've kind of talked about a lot of these already, but these are kind of the main objectives that landowners come to me with. Number 1, by far, is wildlife habitat. Trying to promote specific species on the property. There's a lot of hunters who want to promote deer, turkey, and quail. That's a picture of a quail right there. And many people think that quail are grassland species, but they're actually shrubland obligates. So it's something to consider in those plans. Forest health. Does anybody know what that top picture is of? It's a tree bark. Oh, I don't think I'm hearing it. So that's an ash tree infested with emerald ash borer. So a lot of that bark is flaking off. It's kind of unfair. They're really tiny little holes, but there are tiny little exit holes there that emerald ash borer is emerging out of. Okay, this one might be a little bit easier. What's the plant in the photo right under that picture? Bush honeysuckle, yes. So I mark a lot of bush honeysuckle plants for death, and it's great. Next up, biodiversity, again, promoting a bunch of different species on a site, and that's going to be really good in terms of resiliency, in terms of future stressors like invasive species, like climate change, all that stuff. Restoring function, And that under restoring function, that first picture there is a project that our water quality forester Andy Klein is working on the Cottonwood River, and she's working on a project to reduce erosion at that bend. So you can see there's some rocks being established there, and then also we're planting trees and shrubs, primarily cottonwood and sycamore. And then also another outcome is income. So that top picture is a black walnut plantation. And, you know, when managed sustainably, thinking forward into the future, forest management can help provide a sustained income for a landowner. Okay, cool. So now let's pull fire back in. Myself as a forester and many other foresters, I think I spend like 80% of my time thinking about oak trees. So oak trees are really important for many different reasons. Wildlife habitat, they are just essential for so many different species with the acorns they produce. They're also really important for all of our native pollinators, not all, but many of our native pollinators. And we can actually apply fire to influence oaks at every single life stage they have. So this is another figure, maybe not my favorite, but it's another really good figure from Arthur et al. 2012. And it is showing how we can influence oak regeneration using fire. So that first stage there in the upper right, flowering and pollination and acorn production, if you use fire consistently, you're going to reduce stem density in the forest. That means each tree is going to have less competition and is going to produce more flowers and more acorns. Also, fire is going to prepare the seed bed. You're all gardeners, you know a ton about seed beds, right? Our oaks really like to have contact with bare mineral soil. So consuming some of that leaf litter layer is going to help those acorns make contact with the soil and germinate. That next section there, acorn germination and seedling establishment. Again, using fire can reduce some of the understory and midstory competition for those seedlings, get more sunlight on those oaks, and give them a competitive advantage over some of the more shade tolerant plants. And that's again going to help those seedlings develop. And then we can use fire again to make some more canopy gaps, increase sunlight. Those oaks really, really like that sunlight on their leaves, and that's going to help them release and recruit into the canopy and be a happy, mature tree. A lot of the times in these forests that I walk that have not had any fire in them, there might be actually a lot of tiny oak seedlings hanging out if you're lucky, but they might have been hanging out there for a while. And there's just not enough sunlight for them to respond and become saplings and then eventually recruit into the overstory. So we often need fire to knock back some of that competing vegetation and let those oaks respond.
In the box.
And oaks are just so fire adapted. The mature trees have really thick insulating bark, and those seedlings store most of their energy down in their roots. So when fire comes through, they're able to respond rapidly and hopefully outcompete some of the other species that we're not trying to grow on the site. So again, fire is really, really key for oaks. Okay, this graph is back again, just for a quick case study here. So let's create this imaginary stand. I go out and do my inventory, collect a bunch of data, and I see that there are about 200 trees per acre. And there's a basal area of about 100 square feet per acre, a little bit more. And so I'd plot that on this map, and that is that top blue dot right there. That's where that would be on this graph. Then I meet with the landowner and they say, you know, my goals are really high quality wildlife habitat. I'm a deer hunter. I really want oaks for acorns, and I want more understory vegetation for browse and cover for my deer. Okay, great. To me, that means we need to open up that canopy. We need more sunlight for those oaks, and we need more sunlight for that understory vegetation. So I'm going to go back to my chart and I'm going to figure out what management practices do we want to do. Oftentimes when we're trying to reset a forest so drastically, we will need to couple fire with something like a mechanical thinning, where we're actually going out and killing a lot of the less desirable trees for that site, maybe kill some of the hackberry, elm, ash trees to release those oaks. So we'll come in with our chainsaws and we're going to cut a bunch of trees to reduce from that blue dot down to that orange dot there. So now we're in the open woodland classification. Now that we're there in the open woodland classification, we don't want it to just creep right back to that forest, right? These goals are focused on an open structure. So we're going to use fire to maintain that open woodland, maintain that those conditions, keep those oaks there, keep those canopy gaps there. So that's kind of an idea of how we could put together a plan to achieve that desired outcome. And lastly, I just want to finish out with the prescribed fire at Rice Woodland that you all might have heard about, which was really wonderful. Kansas Forest Service helped KU and was accompanied by a bunch of other firefighters as well to implement a prescribed burn at Rice Woodland, part of Baldwin Woods, just outside Baldwin City. And we burned almost 40 acres and there was over 30 people there. So it all went really well, and I am really excited to go back in the spring to see how things respond. So thank you. I'll hand it over to Bryce to get into the bad. Oh, yeah. Not really. So one of the main things with that is oftentimes those infestations are so severe that those plants are my height or taller, and that is going to cast a lot of shade, a lot of humidity. There's not going to be too much growing under there, so there's not too much of a fuel source. So oftentimes we just can't get it to burn if we tried. Yeah, sure. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say the intensity to kill bush honeysuckle. You know, we're in the woodlands, we gotta make sure our flame lengths and our intensity, so we're not killing the good trees, right? So to zap, burn up bush honeysuckle, you're pretty much gonna destroy everything, you know, in there. The flame intensity heat will kill everything else around it.
Yeah. Bryce might answer some of your questions, so maybe I'll let him talk and then we can have questions at the end. Does that sound good? Yeah. Cool. Okay.
Got me? Maybe audio? Do I need to stand over here? Okay. All right. So I'm Bryce Haverkamp with Kansas Forest Service. EJ and I have a great working relationship. She goes and helps you develop plans and how you want things to happen. And then my job is, well, I wish I could do more of it, is to make it disappear and burn. So if you want something to burn, I can tell you how to do it. The thing with the forest action, you know, she talked about the outcomes of what you want to manage your land. My primary focus is fuel reduction. So when I'm working with landowners, it's how do we reduce your fire threat? Because with the lack of good fire that we've had in the state and the nation is turning into what we refer to as bad fire, that we're burning up homes and having civilian fatalities in the state because our fires are getting so intense with that. So there's a handful of things that go into this. So this is, when we talk about fire regime, this is historically what the United States burned at. So if you look in the Kansas region, and then you compare it down here, historically, fire came through our landscape every 3 to 5, 3 to 6 years. Is how frequently fire was here, pre-inhabitants of the colonialization of folks. So the Native Americans used it for hunting. Mother Nature did it on its own. We have a vast majority of fires that are started by lightning, and that's just Mother Nature creating a way to manage the landscape. So we come in as inhabitants and firefighters, and we see fire, we put it out. Well, that stops growth. That stops the burning that's taking place. And as we develop and move out into the cities, and 70, 80 years ago, you might have one farm stand in a 2-3 mile radius. And now we got 40 or 50 of them. And we got smoke management issues. And there's just a lot of things that's really putting a damper on fire, good fire. We try to push fire is good. If you see smoke on a calm day like today, that's a good thing. It's not bad. Somebody's house isn't burning up, well, hopefully, but the removal of good fire is what's caused us to be having this bad fire that we have now. So we used to have fire come across every 3 to 5 years. Almost all of Kansas was somehow burned and hundreds of years ago. And now we've removed fire. So what's our biggest issue of transitioning good fire to bad fire is the encroachment of cedars and the other woody species. So just from 1965, we've had a 23, and I guarantee you this slide is like 4 years old. So I guarantee you that percentage has gone up drastically more, but a 23,000% increase in cedar population. that cedar is taking over our native grasses. Our cedars is taking over our woodlands. You talk to firefighters 40, 50 years ago, they would say, hey, we just let the fire hit the woods. It would go out because it transitioned and they were able to control it. Well, now our woodlands are being overgrown with cedars, being overgrown with bush honeysuckle, other species that are now allowing fire to continue to creep through and continuing to burn into our woodlands, which they need to be burned, right? But they need to be burned correctly. If we have super intense fire punch into our woodlands, we're going to be destroying and killing good, healthy trees that we don't want to happen. So these are just a couple of slides of just seeing how vast of transition that's taking place. And we have a significant problem on our hands in the state. It's why my job was created. My job didn't exist in 2018. And my job will continue to be predominantly influenced about our fire problem we have in the state. And 100% our fire problem boils down to the fuel loading we call. How much fuel is out on the landscape because of lack of fire. So I'm going to talk a little bit here, and I know there's probably lots of questions about how we burn, but I'm going to talk more about as a landowner why it's important to upkeep your property. We've transitioned into what we call WUI, wild and urban interface fires, all the time. These are where we have fires that are burning into towns, burning in the neighborhoods. They're happening. They happen a lot. You may not hear about them, but it's a continuous trend that's taking place. So when we talk about wild and urban interface, it's anywhere where wildland fuels are in close proximity to homes, man-made developments, which is pretty much anywhere in the eastern 2/3 of Kansas. If we have a fire, it's going to be involving homes, evacuations, and burning of homes. So this is just kind of a continuum of what we refer to as when we talk about a true wildfire, and it's just a wildfire, you're talking the area that's just nothing but natural vegetation that's threatened and burning. You have a fire in Douglas County, you have a WUI fire right off the bat. You have so many homes, so many structures, and the fire department has to work on protecting and how to save as many structures as they can. We'll get into this talk a little bit more. But even what happens a lot with these fires is you get so many homes caught on fire that you start having what's called a home-to-home ignition. So our homes now have transitioned into trees, basically, and the spread of those fires is from home to home to home to home because of not maintaining and upkeeping your property correctly. You have a fire start south of town here or northeast and it runs into the city limits. I guarantee you, Douglas County, they're a great fire department. Lawrence, phenomenal fire department. I work with them all the time, but there will be times that there's nothing that they can do in these extreme events that we keep seeing over and over. And it's going to be 100% up to the landowner on if their property is going to maintain it. You know, they have a big department here, but they don't have a fire truck and staff for every single house to protect. So we rely heavily on the homeowners. So these are just some recent fires. A big one we just had in Hutchinson, 2022. These are happening in extreme events. You probably remember the Fort County one. That was in December. That day I hit all that smoke in December 15th, 16th. All that smoke came from Hayes, Kansas, from this Fort County fire. 180,000 acres that burned in like 2 hours. And those high winds wouldn't allow that smoke to lift, and it just got carried across the landscape. When we have these big events, it's triggered by significant weather events. Like this isn't going to happen on a day like today. It's going to happen on a day where you got 40, 50 mile an hour winds. And we have all this huge fuel loading that's out there. That's going to be the transition of these fires and turning them into these movie fires. But so you look at this Cottonwood, we had 36 homes destroyed, 92 outbuildings, 100 vehicles, 1 civilian death, somebody that couldn't get out fast enough, and 4 civilian. This happened in 3 hours. All this destruction happened in about 3 hours. All right, the Fort County fire, Luckily, the lucky thing about this one was it started in a rural area and never impacted a town. It just burned rural area. But 10 homes, business, 21 outbuildings, another civilian death. We've been averaging a couple, 2 to 5 civilian deaths a year on wildfires in the state since I've started this job.
We're like thousands of cattle too.
100%, millions, multi-million-dollar damages with fence line, cattle. Yes, that's just not even. That's not even the ag side of things. You know, you lose pasture, cattle grazing. I mean, it's a huge devastating effect. Do you have a question back there? Okay, I answered the question. So yeah, this is just the individual, I mean, a person, you know, not their livelihood and work on. So this is, we call it a fire progression map. So we just talked about a 3-hour period. So the green area is when the fire started. And you can see in a matter of 3 hours, it went 3 miles wide and 5 miles wide and 3 miles long. So what happened was we considered this was a red flag warning day. When you hear red flag warnings in the state, that's like a tornado warning. The only thing that's different is there may not be an actual fire going on. That's the difference about the warning difference, but it's talking about how severe of a weather day it is. Red flag warning days are significant fire issue days. If we get a fire started in those days, it is extremely, extremely difficult for the fire department to manage and control. It doesn't matter how good the fire department is. It doesn't matter how prepared. It doesn't matter how great of equipment they have. If we have airplanes and all this stuff, red flag warning days are significant weather days that there's often a lot of times there's nothing as firefighters that we can do besides get people out of the way. Fire will move so fast that we can't do anything about it. So there's a lot of things homeowners can do about this. And there'll be a couple more slides. Is maintaining your property is huge. And you're going to see a slide here in a little bit. Wood shake shingle roofs, if you still have those are significant fire hazards for us because embers land on those things and immediately take off. Your patio furniture, what's on your decks, propane grills, your patio cushion furniture, embers land on those things and then they start your house on fire. It's not very often that the actual big flaming front, we call it, that you see the big tall flames. It's not very often that is what burns your house down. When these cedar trees are burning, they're shooting out hundreds and thousands of little sparks. We call them firebrands or embers. And on hot, dry, windy days, those things can get carried hundreds of feet, you know, quarter of a mile, and then they land in and around your structure. So just imagine your house and having a whole bunch of embers just sprinkling and landing in and around your structure. That's what's going to cause your house to burn up in a wildfire. So it's what's your roof, your gutters, your leaves in your gutters. It's your leaves around the foundation, your exposed decks. What's on your decks? Do you have flammable furniture on your decks? There's studies of even having a broom sitting on the outside. I know a lot of people sweep their patios. Well, that broom is a flammable material that an ember lands on there and starts burning, and that is what gets into your house. So there's a lot that go with that. So part of helping your house, and I know there's gonna be, hopefully I shared, we'll try to send some specific information out to go this, is defending. So Firewise is one of our big things we push with landowners and what you can do to help your properties withstand a significant fire event. The very first part you want to look at your house is the first 5 feet in and around the property. That is the most critical part of your house. So you're going around your structure, not only your house, but if you have a detached garage, if that garage would catch on fire, that's within fairly close proximity, it could generate enough heat and radiant heat to catch your main house on fire. So not only do we look at our primary structure, we look at outbuildings that are nearby. That first 5 feet is the most critical part of your house, the most critical part to maintain. Making sure your gutters are clean, making sure your landscape beds. I know this is where we as foresters and fire people have differences on things. You know, do you want mulch? Mulch is better for plants, but mulch burns, right? Do you have firewise? Do you have rock, landscaping? I mean, there's a whole bunch of different things. The biggest thing about it is maintaining. Like, you have a whole bunch of dead leaves piled up in your flower beds, that embers land into there, and then they catch on fire, then they catch your bush on fire, and then it catches your house on fire. It's that domino effect within that. But that first 5 feet is critical in and around your structure of maintaining. And I'm telling you, like, now is the time to be looking at this stuff. We are rolling into, like, fire departments are already running fires, and we're looking at some windows next week. It's gonna be what do we call game on in the state, where it's gonna be pretty wild. It's gonna get busy, really fast. But we want in that first 5 feet, we want zero direct flame contact to the structure. If we have any sort of active fire in that first 5 feet of your property, it's a significant issue. Then yep.
If you have a lot of mulch,
Mm-hmm.
does it matter if the mulch is wet, like most of the time? Does that help?
So the question was, if your mulch is wet, does that help? 100%. So there's a lot of things that we do. It's like called pre-treating. Like, we'll go out with garden hoses. Like, if you know you have an impending fire that's hitting your property, like, we get garden hoses and we're spraying, wetting things down. So if the ember lands on wet mulch or wet grass or a wet roof, it won't continue to burn and take off. So having wet fuel is important. The biggest thing about your landscaping bed is how close. So you have your structure, and then you have your lap siding, you have a brick ledge. Any exposed wood framing that it can get into behind your wall is the most important thing. So if you have a whole bunch of mulch piled all the way up to your siding, right? And there's no separation, and then the mulch starts smoldering, well, then you have direct flame contact to the component of your house. Now, if you have mulch up to the side of your house and it's right up to the foundation, concrete, but there's a 6-inch, 8-inch gap between, that's where your siding starts, and you'll probably be okay. But it's just that we've kind of referred to the domino effect as how does fire continually burn, get to your structure, and then come in contact with any wood part of your house. And that's how it's gonna get in and get exposed. That answers your question. Yes.
Is there anything that you can do legally if the landowner next to you has a bunch of dead trees and they're not gonna live here or whatever? What can we do, or what can we not do?
I don't have a good answer for that. If your neighbor has unkept grounds, Kansas is, unfortunately, from our side of things, I don't know the exact percentage, but it's like 93 or 94% privately owned, right? So even me as a state person, I can't come in and tell you how to do things. Like, I can provide recommendations. So educate them is the big thing with it. I guess the big thing, the first thing would be like codes, if there's building codes they're violating. I don't know, but legally, I couldn't answer. I couldn't give a good recommendation on that, but that's the hardest thing is you can do everything in the world for your property, but the next door doesn't, then, that increases your vulnerability. As the state, I would come in, and I love running chainsaws. I was running them all day yesterday. I'll come cut all day long, but then the funding portion of it is the big side of things. So, but like I said, and these extreme events, they're not often, like, we don't have these huge devastating fires all the time, but when they happen, it happens so fast, there is absolutely nothing you can do. Like, so you have to be prepared ahead of time. It is the big key within that.
Just having the same question going through my head because, you know, compare it. There's a noxious weed guy that can go around. If you have a problem with certain types of plants, they can flag it. You can be cited for that. So what would it take to get something like, because the fire is equally dangerous to having the invasive, the noxious weeds and plants. If you can flag those, what would it take to get
A state
that?
law.
I,
Well, that's
Good luck
just
with
it.
that.
That's just it.
yeah, and I don't want to go, yeah. I don't want to go too like deep into the legal, because I mean, it's an issue. We know it's an issue. I mean, a lot of people, I would say, I just don't want to speak and say things that
Yeah.
are, you know, not, you know, politically, so we know this is an issue. How do we go about addressing and fixing it? It's a huge thing. Just like the smoke management. We know burning creates smoke. Smoke can have health issues to folks. But at the same time, if we have these huge devastating wildfires, you're gonna create 10 times, 100 times the amount of smoke that's gonna come out of it. So it's a very gray area. We know it's an issue. They did a big study last year. They called it the Governor's Mitigation Task Force that continued to look at why we're having these issues. They know fuel and land management is a significant contributing, but how do you go about it? Like, does your taxpayer money, you know, create these crews and then they go around? Well, then you start working for private people. Well, you help this person. Why aren't you? I mean, it's just a very, very, very gray area. And that's why we promote so much of each and every landowner needs, you know, any way possible to take ownership and making sure that their property can withstand, because there are times, and I'll show you a slide here in a second, about there's nothing a fire department can show up on a bad fire day and there can be absolutely zero that they can do. There's just not enough time. I think she had it. Yeah.
Just a comment about neighbors, properties. There are city and county zoning laws, and most of them have a planner or a commissioner. So my suggestion would be to contact, you know, if you're in the city commissioner, or the county if you're in a rural area. Because there are zoning laws out there. How much it would help, I don't know, but it would at least give you a start, kind of some idea what legal regulations are for the area.
Yeah, sounds good.
So Sharon wrote a grant
Mhm.
to develop a document called Living in Rural Douglas County. And it occurs to me as we write this on here, that this idea of a land assessment might be one of those things that would give a good heads up to a new landowner about what they need to do to improve
Yeah.
their property.
And we have a new document. We just updated. Ariel's holding it in the back. It's a landowner's guide. It's part of this program called Ready, Set, Go. As a landowner, is how do you ready your property? If it comes to a wildfire, like what you need to be prepared for to evacuate, what you need to take with you. But in that Ready, Set, Go document, talks about Firewise and talks about actions to do in and around your property to reduce your risk. I think the link will be, do you have a way to email the whole group?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, because I know I sent Ariel some links that'll take it directly to our website that will have that information in a PDF access. And I can't stress that it's a super, very beneficial document to have as that landowner, especially in that rural setting. And how to upkeep and maintain your property to reduce your fire threat.
And forgive me if I am preempting you. This was told to me decades ago, and it really struck me. We live in a golf course community, and the rough was big blue stem that they would burn every couple of years. And they would always tell the homeowners to put out a hose and whatever. And I went to the superintendent and I said, we're 75 feet from where you're burning. And he said, what happens is the rabbit that lives in the firewood in a nice fluffy nest is out there and it's on fire and the first thing it does is run home. And I'm going, okay, I can see how that would. So that's what, that 5 foot
Yep.
zone, that now would probably be a good time to go into your firewood and just move it, get rid of all the things that are living in there and move farther away because the fires are coming
Yep.
this spring.
Yeah.
So forgive me if I preempted.
No, you don't. And it talks about all that stuff in that document, but the big thing with your home is, everybody's like, well, I want to have nice landscape. I want to be able to, and you can, you just got to manage it. So in that intermediate zone, that 5 to 30 feet, this is where we have to make sure we talk about the domino effect, is if you have fire that you don't have the canopy where it can progress through your property from tree to tree to tree to tree. So we want to make sure we have spacing. We want to make sure our trees are manicured. We don't have the heavy branches that are laying all the way down on the ground. So if you do have a fire burning through your property, it allows it to, we call it ladder fuel, allows that fire to come out of the grass and start climbing up your tree because of the connectivity of the branches. So in that intermediate zone, this is where we're trying to make sure our vegetation, our bushes, our trees, our shrubs, everything we have on our property, we call defensible space. So if one of them does burn, it doesn't catch the tree right next to it on fire. It doesn't catch the brush right next to it on fire, or the bush or the shrub, and then allows it to continue to progress closer to your property. So there's different zones, typically 100 feet. That's all you really have to within your property. If you have outside of 100 feet, if you have cedars that are torching off, 100-foot flames in the air, as long as that's happening at least 100 feet away from your property, there's a highly likelihood that that's not going to impact your house. It's that first 100 feet is what we're super concerned about. But the most critical failure, if you have a house that's going to burn up in a wildfire, it's going to happen within that first 5 feet. And so that document kind of goes through there. And this is where I was referring to. 30 years of neglect around in your property and not maintaining it. A fire department is going to show up on a red flag day with a huge fire, and they're going to drive by this and they're going to be, sorry, there's nothing we can do. The amount of time, the amount of energy, the amount of effort, the amount of resources that's going to take to try to save one property, they're going to say no. Unfortunately, I've had to make these decisions numerous times. Is that, well, there might be 4 other houses down the road that I know I can save, and I'm going to go save those 4 and let this one go. It's your fire departments. Yes, they do an oath. They risk their lives for everything, but on these extreme days, like I said, you could have the New York City Fire here with, 300 or 3,000 firefighters, and on those extreme fire days,
Okay.
there's nothing that they
That's a
can
good
do
show.
to save a property
Good
that
girl.
has not been neglected. You're gonna get just those tall grasses, those 4 foot, 6 foot grasses. You'll get 40, 50-foot flame lengths just rocking out of that grass. And the BTUs, as a firefighter, even with our protective gear, we couldn't even get close enough without significantly burning ourselves or getting firefighters killed. So it's super important as landowners.
Good girl.
that
That's a
you
good girl.
practice good efficacy and making sure that your properties are well maintained. So on our website, I don't know if I can, is there a way to go to the web browser? I probably should have shown. I was going to show you a couple documents real quick that has a lot of good information, but kansasforest.org is our website that has a lot of information on it. This Ready, Set, Go documents on there. Prescribed fire, we have a whole section on prescribed fire. If you want to, we have a lot of contractors in the state. Unfortunately, we as the Kansas Forest Service, I can come help do technical stuff and talk to you about how and why to burn your property. But as far as us physically doing it, I'm the only person in Northeast Kansas. So I cover from Johnson County, I-70 to Salina and north. That's my district. We're very, very underfunded, I would put it that way. So there's not a lot I can do, right? But we have contract lists that you can there's a lot of local contractors. But one thing that we really try to help push is neighbors helping neighbors, scratching backs. They call them prescribed burning associations, PBAs. And we will help with that. So there is a PBA in Eastern Kansas. They just morphed into Johnson County, but they started in Miami County. And it's just a group of landowners that gets together. Hey, I got a UTV with a sprayer. Hey, I got an old pickup truck that I can put a 200-gallon spray tank in. And then they get together on a weekend and they're gonna go burn 4 or 5 people's properties. So there's a great asset, a great way to do that. But on our website here, there's a lot, I mean, there is a ton of information. We, as our agency, you have EJ and me, and there's 40 other people that do a lot of different things within us. So we have these tabs, but a couple things I wanted to hit is in fire management. When you open up this tab, if you scroll down to prevention, Smokey the Bear, if you want Smokey the Bear at an event, let me know. I can get you Smokey the Bear. We got a lot of costumes for you. But this is that ready, set, go document. If you click on it, it's a long PDF. I know Ariel's got a handful of physical copies back there to use. We just redid the brochure, but here's a PDF of it. It's a personal wildfire action plan for your own property. But you can scroll through here. It talks about how to prepare your property. It talks about creating defensible space. It talks about a checklist of if I get told to evacuate, you know, you hear red flag warning days, you hear of a fire, you're going to have very limited time, especially if it's going to impact your property. We're talking minutes. We're not talking, oh, nationally, when I go out west, I deploy out of state all the time. I go, you name a state, I've probably been there. Nationally, when you get into these forest fires, homeowners may have weeks to know in advance that this fire is going to impact their property. In Kansas, you don't. You have minutes, right? So we talk about that. So it's a really great guide to utilize. Another, I'm trying to find the back here. Another good guide in the fire management is if you're wanting to learn more about prescribed fire. Once again, if you go down to the prevention section, if you click on prescribed fire, we have a whole section on prescribed fire. Up here is a list of available private contractors that will come help and burn for you. We don't recommend one or the other. I have no idea what they charge. It all depends. They will come to your property, and if they got to put in fire breaks, it's probably going to cost a little more than if it's ready to burn. But we also have what's called here this prescribed burning notebook. And it's just a huge, if you come to one of our prescribed fire classes, we host a lot of prescribed fire classes. You typically will get this notebook. That's part of the fees for registering, but it's a huge document. I don't know how many pages it is, 30 or 40 page, or actually 146, very big document. But there's a ton of research of like why we want to burn. It talks about burn plans. It talks about techniques. It's just a very coordinated. I'm not trying to find an adjective to use right now, but it's a very great document to utilize for that local landowner. So a lot of great information. There's a ton of good information about our district foresters and trees, which ones to grow. We have a conservation tree group. We have a nursery. We grow. You can get trees from us. Yes, we sell Eastern red cedar. So I have to do a little caveat here of why we still do is because they are resilient and they will grow anywhere. So they're great for windbreaks. They're great for providing shade for cattle if they are managed correctly. When you don't manage your land with cedars, they will overtake. There's actually a male and a female. Then they know there's a male and a female cedar. I would make a joke, but I'm not, because I'll probably offend some people. But, the females are the ones that are the invasive ones. The females with the berries, those are the invasive ones. So we joke around in the fire world, like anytime you burn a cedar, it's a good day, but specifically anytime you cut a cedar, especially one with the berries. So I think we're still working. We haven't got there yet, have we? Where we're gonna,
On the trial,
on,
I got an update yesterday, Jason Griffin at Pearson is working with us on $50,000 grant.
so eventually we will only sell male cedars. Cedars are one of the only native. The only native, I mean, they've been around for years, so why is it now? Why is it now that we have a 30,000% increase? Why is it now? No buffalo, yeah. Fire is the reason. Good fire is the main reason with that. So anyhow, that's all I got. We are open for a lot of questions. I'm sure we have, way in the back of this.
Trying to open up the forest, how do you burn in an oak forest without killing the mature oak trees?
Great, oh, do I repeat it?
I can. So the question was, how do you do a burn in the oak forest without destroying everything? So
I'll start. Yeah, so great question. The oaks in particular are really, really fire adapted. So like one of those nice massive oak trees, you're really unlikely to kill that tree if you're applying a proper burn. You know, you want a low intensity surface fire, that's probably not gonna hurt that tree. One other thing you can do is if you do have some of those really high value trees that you worry about, you can just go out, get your leaf blower, get your rake and clear off any sort of leaf litter around that or any other fuel around that tree. So now those flames aren't going to be going straight up to that trunk. They'll be staying in a little buffer around it. So that's one way you can manage for those high value trees. Anything else?
burning in the timber, a lot of people get nervous about it, and all it is changing tactics. Most people that have experience burning, they're burning prairies, they're burning grasslands where they set a head, they kind of do the ring and they ring around it and they set a head fire and they let that thing run through the unit because you're trying to create high intensity to kill all the woody species. In the timber, it's different. We want to do what's called slow and control. We want to back that fire all the way through. So if we have a north wind, we want to start at that north end and we do what's called stripping. So instead of going circling all the way around the property, we'll start at downwind and we'll just zigzag back and forth. So when you put fire on the ground and it burns hits your next fire, the next fire line, then it puts itself out. So we create low intensity. We try to keep flame lengths under like 2 feet. It is kind of that rule of thumb to where it's going to generate a little bit of heat that it might kill like very, really young saplings. And that's why it doesn't take care of your bush honeysuckle. So if we would want to get rid of bush honeysuckle, we would have to put a high intensity fire into the timber, and that's when you're going to kill all your mature trees. Our hardwoods in Kansas, because I get this a lot as well, they see California, they see Colorado, they see these forests that are just, nuking everything out. I'm not saying you can't do that in Kansas. It's very difficult because of the resiliency of our oaks and hickories and walnuts. Now, as we continue to have more and more cedars taking over, then it's going to get very easy to where we'll get that fire behavior in Kansas, because now you have the understory growth of the cedars that's going to generate that heat that's going to start killing, and then it's going to start creating so much energy and heat, it will start burning up our oaks and hickories.
And what Bryce just described is exactly what we did at Rice Woodland. We didn't want any flame lengths above 2 feet. It crept right across that forest floor. We were doing those strips like that. And so we didn't have any sort of, flare ups. And in areas where there was like maybe some hanging dead wood that did catch on fire, we just had people walk the area and preferentially just kind of whack that out of a tree or get it on the ground. So that mop up is really important for forests too, and Bryce can talk about that too, but it's not like a grassland where you light it and it's done in an hour. You're surveying that area for potentially days to make sure it's out.
I was just out last night with my local fire department on an out of control grass fire from a pile burn they lit January 6th. So that cottonwood fire I talked about in Hutchinson was a rekindle from a pile burn 3 weeks prior to that. So when you start burning timber, the biggest difference is grass, you burn it, 10 minutes later, it's cool, it's out, it's gone, it's over with. When you start burning timber, and especially the dead and down material, that stuff will smolder and burn for days. So even weeks, January 6th was when it was this huge pile. They're like, wow, we lit it with all the snow on the ground, which was a great time to light it. But the problem is these big piles will burn for weeks on end if you don't stir them up and mess with them. So timber it just elongates. It takes longer to burn. It takes longer to patrol and mop them up to make sure nothing comes out. But if you're doing it safely in a controlled manner, they're outside of needing more resources. Instead of 2 people, you might need 10 or 15. Instead of 1 UTV, you might need 3 or 4. It's just a longer commitment, a bigger commitment. But as far as difficulty and technicality, it's not that much more difficult to deal with the timber.
Any other questions?
When you say big pile, do you mean like a bonfire? pile?
Brush piles.
So. Have a massive brush pile
Uh-huh.
in my house, right?
Yep.
Set
Don't burn it
up.
now.
What?
Don't burn it now. Don't burn it now.
Sit down, you mean today?
Like this spring. Or if you are gonna burn it, I would burn like 100 foot of grass all the way around it. That pile, if you light it now, it will burn probably for 4 or 5 weeks. And we are hitting our critical fire stage. So the best time to actually burn is right after green up, like late April, early May, where you've had all this moisture, all the grass around you is vividly green. So if you get embers that come out of that brush pile, it's landing in green grass. You'll have a I'm not saying you can't burn the brush pile. I'm just saying historically what happens and what's forecasted, like next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we're gonna have probably our first major fire system come across the state where we're gonna have increased high winds. So if you burn today or you burn tomorrow, that pile will still be hot and we'll still be able to throw embers out when we get those 40, 50 mile an hour winds that they're forecasting. So then you have a rekindle issue.
Can you water it?
You can.
Will that change anything?
The day or 2 that you're burning, yes. So what the big thing that people forget about with their piles is
I mean, once it's burned down.
once it's burned down, you need to what we call open it up. So you need to open the things up and continue to apply water in there to cool things out. What a lot of people do, they'll light their fire, it'll burn all the way down, and then they go and check it in the morning. Well, the mornings, fire behavior is always the time we have our highest relative humidity, which relative humidity is a huge component of fire behavior. If you put like a time lapse on a burn pile, like 3 days after you, and that camera will show you as the day gets hotter, the day gets drier. So you can look at that pile at 7 o'clock in the morning and see 0 heat and see any smoke. But as the day goes on and that thing dries out and the humidity goes away, you'll start seeing stuff smoldering and you'll start seeing smoke come out of it because the humidity in the atmosphere. Humidity, I could go on for hours on fire behavior. But relative humidity is a huge issue with our state. And it has an inverse relationship with temperature. So as one goes up, the other one goes down. So you look at a typical day, what is the coldest part of our days? Mornings, 6:30, 7. So if that's our coldest part of the day, that's also considered our wettest part of the day. That's why you wake up some mornings, you got dew on the grass, or you have ice on your windshields because of the humidity and the temperature. But as what's happening now is we're getting warmer. So as we get warmer, then our humidity in the atmosphere is getting lower. And the lower humidities, what drives our wildfires. So not saying don't burn. I'm just saying if you would just light your pile today and it burns down and you don't do anything with it, you'll have a high probability of having an escape come out of it in a few days from now. That's why we promote, and this is what we did last night with our fire department. This guy had burnt 3 huge piles in a bunch of timber. So we had stuff skunking through the timber. He had a bunch of open grass. We just burned 100 foot around everything so that if embers do come out, it's landing in burnt grass to where it can't reignite and take off. So keeping it wet, burning it, tractor disking around it. But that first 100 foot is where you're going to have an issue of a rekindle as that pile continues to burn down.
Are your pine trees the worst trees to catch fire? Pines or cedars?
Cedars, yeah, by far. They're a nemesis because they burn so rapidly and they'll put out anywhere from 4 to 6 times their flame length. So if you have the tree height. So if you have a 6 foot tall cedar, you can get 40 foot, 50 foot flames out of it. And then what you need as a buffer, another rule of thumb is we need to do 0 like tactics. We need 10 times flame height for that fire to hold on its own. So if you take a 6 foot tall cedar, it could put out 40 to 50 foot flame lengths. Then we need a 500 foot buffer from all the embers coming out of it to where if those embers were landing, it's not going to start a new fire and take off. So this is why when we have these extreme events, you know, a 20, 30 foot wide county road isn't going to hold any sort of fire that has cedars involved with it. Or, you know, even 4 foot tall prairie grass, you can get 25, 30 foot flame lengths. So you got a 40 mile an hour wind day and that fire, instead of being 40 feet in the air, it's bent over. That's why roads very frequently on these high fire, the fires just jump roads. Like there's nothing. And then you're trying to drive and catch them and they're running 20, 30 miles an hour, you know, through a field. So it's very, very, like I said, extreme days. This doesn't happen every day. This isn't what's going to happen today. Even tomorrow, we might have a little increased winds. This weekend, Friday, Saturday is going to be hotter and drier. It's not going to happen on those days. It's going to be these extreme events like red flag warning days. Like if you hear red flag warning, that should be like the whole, hey, I probably should do a little sweep around my property just to make sure that first 5 feet is what's critical to make sure if we do get a fire, I've done just these little things that could help protect my property.
Yeah, and real quick, as people are starting to head out, we have Ariel Whitley-Miller, our communications coordinator in the back. She's amazing. She has a bunch of publications there. She also hosts a book club, a podcast, all this awesome stuff. So we can keep taking questions, but just for folks who are leaving, don't be afraid to stop back there and chat and get some information about how you can stay connected.
Yeah.
If you ever went to see around your house, wouldn't it smart to raise the bottom up 6 to 8 feet off the ground?
Yeah, so the question was, if you do have a bunch of cedars, how do you maintain them? Because they are great. They put out a lot of shade, windbreaks. We look at what we call the ladder fuels. So we don't want any branches from that cedar that's laying onto the ground. So a lot of times, if I'm what we call prepping, if I'm prepping to do a burn, or if I'm prepping a house that may be impacted by fire, I just go into what's called limbing. So the bottom 3 to 4 foot is nothing but the trunk of the tree that's going to be exposed to that ground fire. If there's branches hanging all the way down, just think of the domino effect and think of a ladder. Fire will climb up a tree just like you climb up on a ladder. It's going to start at the base. So if there's a way to limb things, and we do that a lot, we'll just cut the bottom 2 or 3 where the branches aren't down, because if you have grass, then you also got to look at your grass. If you have inch tall grass, or do you have 4 foot tall grass? Another just good rule of thumb with cedars is you need about a third of the tree height and vegetation around it for it to completely burn up that cedar. So when we talk about fire and using fire to kill cedars, if you got a 6 foot tall cedar, you need 2 foot flame lengths to impact that cedar to get it to light off and go. So if you got 4 inches, 8 inch grass, you know what I mean? You're probably gonna have maybe a 2 foot buffer, but if there's 4 foot tall grasses in and around that cedar, you could, yeah, I would. And you'll also look like with cedars, and this is where it's hard with in the forestry side and burning with a bunch of cedars, is cedars choke out all the daylight. So under those cedars, there's literally 0 ground fuel. So you even have a hard time burning good fire with a bunch of cedars because there's nothing on the ground for that fire to kind of creep and carry through. So unfortunately, once you get to a tipping point with cedars, with the only thing you can do is mechanically go in and cut them. When they just do get so big, fire will prevent the saplings and the new ones from growing into big mature ones. But if you got 4 foot tall, 5 foot tall cedars, you're gonna have to mechanically cut them, because to get the fire behavior to kill them, you're gonna kill everything else around it. Yes.
New owner of 40 acres, and I know I got some problems. How do we get an assessment of what we have? And I'm speaking as the mother of a captain of the fire department.
Yeah.
And the first year I was there, we had fire next door, 400 acres, came within 30 feet of 3 homes. So, you know, a high prairie, but with some new forest growth along some waterways. Hickory, walnut.
Yeah. I mean, there's services like EJ and I work together, like if you're looking to develop a forest plan, you know, she comes out and then based on schedules, so we, yeah, so I try to come out, as fast as I can and we can help
So just
develop
contact you
plans.
off of your-
Mhm,
Thanks.
yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
You talked about the wind the next week. Where do you find out about that?
Ooh, the weather service is a great place. That's where I utilize. Your Lawrence's Topeka still? I think. Yeah, Topeka and KC, the weather service. There is a great. I don't know if I'm still screen sharing. Let me see. So a great. Oh. New laptop. Different laptop. I gotta figure out the keyboard. If you go to Topeka National Weather Service, there's a couple of cool tools. What's this? 66049? 044.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyhow, if you just type in the zip code, a lot of people just look up top here and it just kind of gives you a broad idea of what the weather is going to be like. I always like to scroll down here and then give you an hour to hour graph down. So if you click on this hourly weather forecast, it's going to pull up. You can select all these charts if you want them. But it's going to give you an hour by hour, and it's also going to give you wind direction. So this second column here, this is your wind chart. So not only is it going to tell you the direction, it's also going to tell you your speed. And then this top line is going to be gusts. So once you start getting over 20 mile an hour, they're going to start talking gusts. But you can go 7 days out with this. So you're talking Thursday afternoon. Like I talked about, we're going to start getting 25, 30 mile an hour winds. So just really briefly, for a red flag warning to be issued in this area, you have to have above 20 mile an hour winds and below 20% relative humidity for greater than a 2-3 hour wind or window with that. But then, yeah, you can go out multiple days. So you can start seeing, we're going to start having high increased winds. I don't know, like we're to Monday and well, here comes Monday, but we're gonna have a prolonged, like multi-day, 3-day weather event that's could cause us some issues. So the big caveat is we got a whole bunch of moisture this spring and this winter. Great, moisture's awesome. Well, it's a double-edged sword. Moisture causes things to grow. We're a predominant grass component in the state. So more moisture means more grass means more fuel means more fire means harder to control. Well, we're also what's called a 1 hour, grass is a 1 hour fuel model. That means it can adapt to the current weather within an hour. So we could have a 1-inch rainstorm today, this morning, and then this afternoon, we could have 30-mile-an-hour winds and 80 degrees and 15% RH. That 1 hour, that 1 inch of moisture within 1 hour, the grass will act like it's dry and dead. So that's why this time period, when our grass is predominantly still dormant, all this moisture we got doesn't mean diddly squat. All it just means is fire department's gonna have a harder time fighting it, because what's gonna happen, which is already happening, is they drive off into the fields and their fire trucks and they immediately get buried. Because the grasses are burning, but the soil is still wet. The swamps in Florida burn. They burn them on a regular basis. Like, you have to have swamp buggies and driving through the swamps to fight fire, because the tops are exposed and they adapt to the weather really frequently. So we have a very dynamic fire, but yeah, that's where I get the majority. Another really good site, and I know people want to go, but has anybody ever heard of the Mezzanette site? I'm a Jayhawker, so don't count against me, but it's managed, it's through K-State. This is also a really good live system. So all these dots are 24/7 ROS stations. You can see we're precip, you can see wind, but on this 3-bar thing over here, there's a whole bunch of stuff. Agriculture, like what's your moisture content? What's your annual precipitation that you're getting? Has for cattle, has a comfort level. So you know how comfortable your cattle are when it's really hot or really cold. But in the fire, a new tool we just released is called a fire danger forecast. And this doesn't tell you what's the likelihood of having a fire. It tells you how difficult it's going to be. So going back to, oh, she got up and left. Burning her brush piles. And if you're doing prescribed fire, you can't just look at today. You have to look at what's tomorrow, what's Thursday gonna be like. So it goes out 7 days. Whoop. So you can see we're drying out. The system's gonna come, and then we're gonna start experiencing very high fire danger within that. But also it has, like I said, you're gonna know what RHs are across the state. Like there's a lot of good tools. So the National Weather Service and then the Mezzanette are my go-tos with any of that fire weather stuff.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Oh, okay, yeah.
Thank you guys so much.
No problem.
Thanks for listening.
Hey.
No, that's great.
Obviously, a lot of interest. Thank you. Thank
Yes,
you very
no
much.
problem.
Sorry, we were just looking at another program. I have a question I gotta ask you. I'll do it another time because I'm leaving the next program.
Anytime.
So, yeah.
I mean,
well, well, the one thing I'm really curious about is what might be replacing the internships, like the better one, sort of structure of the board, especially like